Well, the time is just gone 9:32 a.m. We continue with news and views this morning and taking a look at the impact of load shedding. Now, when one looks at the impact of load shedding in more ways than one, a lot of focus has been on economy, on businesses, on how households obviously have suffered as a result of load shedding, all these negative impacts. But one impact is clear, and we are talking about the mental health because when one talks about load shedding, it is the major talking point. In fact, I think it is a talking point in each and every household on a day-to-day basis, considering what we are faced with and simple things that we were used to in the past. Just having the lights on, being able to cook. Being able to work from home, your Wi-Fi switched on all the time, sitting in traffic lights not working, driving in the dark at night, street lights not working, dodging potholes, all of that affects a person's mindset. It affects the quality of life, and psychologically, certainly, it is having an impact. And this is the reason why we are talking this morning with counseling psychologist Lerato Mokgethi. Lerato, good morning to you, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Lerato. In fact, very little is spoken of the impact of load shedding on mental health, the psychological impact, and it is clear that because it is such a major talking point. In fact, it's become somewhat of an obsession to discuss load shedding all the time, and clearly, it does affect the one's mindset. It does affect people in more ways than one.
That's correct. Mental health in South Africa generally is rated amongst the worst in the world. So, with load shedding, there's a high sense of unpredictability, uncertainty, which leads to generally a sense of anger, frustration, despair, and general disillusionment. And I agree completely with what you are saying about it's a basic loss of service, which contributes significantly to depression and anxiety. And I think it's important to also note that load shedding is not just an inconvenience. It's not about just getting a candle or lights or using backup power, but there's a significant loss of income. There's disruption to learning, significantly increased crime, affecting communities. It affects also commuting to work, to school, even to home, damage to resources. And I think it's also significant to understand the psychological impact, especially not because you are off for 2, 3 hours, but the failing infrastructure where communities, homes, households are left for days without power.
Well, certainly, and also in terms of the related issues, like I just drove back from Cape Town and I stopped over in a little town called Hanover, and there was load shedding, and when load shedding goes off, the water goes off as well. So what I'm saying is these are important issues because you want to wash, you need water, and the emotional well-being, the impact, the negative impact on the emotional well-being of people, and this is right across the board. We're talking of young, old, we're talking of children. We are talking of an entire country, an entire society that is suffering as a result of load shedding in a negative way.
That's completely true. Residents are completely on survival mode, which heightens anxiety. It's very difficult to plan around load shedding. As much as we have the schedule to work around to prepare, but it heightens levels of anxiety and depression. So I think it's also important, and I fully agree with what you are saying. There's no power, there's no water. Socially, socioeconomically, individuals are affected, families are affected, young people as well. In school, for example, dehydration, learners are in school, and not all classrooms have natural sunlight, and they don't have water as well as a result of load shedding. So it's extremely difficult to adapt and adjust to. So psychologically, it only heightens and it causes a significant deterioration, especially with those who have an already existing mental health difficulty.
Yes, and also Lerato, having come out of the COVID era, and we know that what that had actually done psychologically and the mental health of people, and straight into a situation where we are now faced with load shedding, and also we know that many people are still recovering, or they haven't even recovered as a result of the pandemic. And load shedding is a different type of pandemic that they are faced with, particularly looking at those that are sick, the elderly, those that rely on machinery, those that rely on oxygen, those that rely on having the power on just for their own health. For the sake of the health, that again is another problem, because we've seen so many people that are still suffering the effects of COVID, being on oxygen, and the oxygen is not available for 3 4 hours, at a time as well. So all of this are contributory factors.
Thank you for actually touching on the link. COVID was very traumatic, and what load shedding has done is it elicits the same trauma response that the country individuals had. Remember, with COVID load shedding, it wasn't just an individual problem; it was also a systemic, a community problem as well. So the trauma response, it's very similar. It follows the same trajectory of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's why I mentioned earlier that we are constantly on survival mode. It's one crisis after another. And I think, as South Africans, we really deserve a break. The psychology of the country is currently really at stake, and it's alarming and very concerning.
Yes. Now, how does one actually break out of the depression, the trauma, and the negative psychological impact at a time like this, Lerato, considering that things are not going to improve in the short term?
Thank you for actually asking that question. I think, firstly, it's important to recognize what is within your control, right? I don't think there's anything anyone can do with regards to the schedule, with regards to load shedding. And I think know your schedule and plan accordingly. And look, we all are in communities and no man is an island. So it's very important to also seek support amongst your community, but also offer support. I mean, sometimes all it takes is hot water to make somebody's day. And I think also look at how you can best adjust and adapt to the environment. I mean, I heard somebody explaining load shedding to a little one and said it's the government giving us time to play. So I think to some degree, finding ways to keep entertained. But this is not to negate the negative impact of mental illness. It's very important to also seek professional help. I know facilities, resources are very scarce and very limited and under-resourced and under-equipped. But it's very important to seek professional help when you do experience mental health, anxiety, depression associated with load shedding and these rolling power cuts.
Yes, from all negatives, one can actually find some positives. And I quite like the idea where you're talking about communities rallying together. And this is absolutely important because, on a social level, on a socio-economic level, there's just so much that we can actually do to make a difference in someone's
Mm,
life, considering that all of us, or majority of us, 99% of us, are actually experiencing the same problem.
mm. Oh, definitely. And I think we always underestimate our own ability to support and help each other. So I think if one person can just make that attempt to help your community, help your neighbor, it really goes a long way. It really, really goes a long way. And sometimes it's just having a chat with somebody to check on how they're doing.
Yes, and just on an individual level and on a family level, what sort of advice would you give to families, Lerato?
And I think, especially where there's young children involved or your teens or school going children, I think offer as much support as possible and try to keep a certain level of structure. It becomes very difficult for learning, homework, studying for test exams when there's load shedding. So I think for families, it's important to try and support each other as possible. Um, For example, if you're not getting a warm meal tonight, be as adaptable and flexible as it is. We easily become frustrated, angry, you've been in traffic, you are late for school or late for work. So support each other and be kinder to each other as families, as loved ones, as much as possible, and see where can you help.
Well, Lerato, thank you very much for that. And look, it's a very important discussion to be having. And I don't think many are having the type of discussion that we are having, but that is reality. This is what we are actually faced with. And I think from time to time, one needs to revisit this discussion, so because we know load shedding is still going to be with us for a long time. In fact, recently we heard, let's say, right up to 2027. And also
Mhm.
looking at the generations that are growing up, the young children that are growing up, who grow now growing up through a COVID era, now through a load shedding era. It's a completely different era for them. It's a completely different time, and it's not normal. This is not normal, Larato. Yes, I think Larato has frozen, but oh, there we go.
Sorry,
Okay.
I lost you there for just a bit. Yes, yes.
I'm just saying, for the generations that are growing up now, especially the young ones, the very young ones, having come through the COVID era, having now being experiencing a load shedding, a completely different era that they actually growing in, which is not normal.
Look, young South Africans continue to bear the burden of just issues that are happening in the country. But I think it's also important to note that children are very adaptable. This becomes the new normal, right? I mean, if you look at your toddlers, they become very accustomed to being in the dark. For them, it's normal. So children tend to be very adaptable and flexible, but this is not to take away just the difficulties that come with being in the dark or having come from, there are those who are doing online schooling, the difficulties when there's load shedding. So I think it's also very, very important to recognize that little ones are able to adapt and flexible than adults, but at the same time, it takes a lot of support and guidance from parents and families.
Well, thank you very much for that, Larato, and for your time with us this morning here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best. Please take care, and once again, appreciate you taking time out.
Thank you so much.
Lerato Mokgethi with us this morning, counseling psychologist, the impact of load shedding on mental health. We're going to go for a break. Now, this is quite inspiring. Next up, we've got Zubair Abbas, Bond Foods, Rylands, a pot and 350 Rand, and how this has created endless opportunities for a person.